This past Sunday, my wife and I drove up to the Catskill Mountains to pick up our daughter from camp. She was there for a full month. She was part of the head staff and personally responsible for the safety and security, the physical and emotional well-being of 90 13-year-old girls. When we came there, she was standing at the entrance of her camp with a group of co-workers. They all hugged for several long minutes, and then we were on our way. My wife and I were sitting in the front, and our daughter was in the back. As we drove, I heard sobbing. I took a quick glance and saw tears in her eyes. "Why are you crying?" I asked. "I'm going to miss my friends. For the last few weeks, we spent day and night together working hard to ensure that our campers had the best, most enjoyable and meaningful experience. And now I'm going to miss my friends very much. And I'm very sad." "Wow, that's so beautiful," I said. "Why is it so beautiful that I'm sad?" "It's beautiful that you forged such friendships. It's beautiful that spending time with them was so meaningful that it brings you to tears when it's over. There are many people in this world that are crying, but their tears are not beautiful tears like yours. They're painful tears. They're sad tears. They don't have friends or companions or family with which spending time is so meaningful that when they part, they cry. You should thank God that you are blessed with close friends and a loving family whose time with you is so meaningful that whenever, for whatever reason, there's a temporary separation, it brings you to tears. Your tears are also meaningful because the separation from your close friends is only temporary. You'll be in touch with them, and you'll also be seeing them in the future. The time you spent with them in the future will be more meaningful because now you realize how meaningful it was in the past. On Tisha B'Av, when we commemorate the destruction of the Temple and Jerusalem, Jews all over the world shed a lot of tears. But why? What is the benefit of crying over the past? Lots and lots of people spend a lot of time and money going to therapists to help them forget traumas of the past and move on with life. What is the purpose of holding on to sad memories for so many years? We lost the Beis Hamikdash and Jerusalem twice in the past. The first time was when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, destroyed the temple and the city. That was 2,445 years ago. And again, 490 years later, in the year 70, Titus led his massive Roman forces to Jerusalem to burn down the Beis Hamikdash and crush the Jews. Over 1 million Jews were massacred, and hundreds of thousands were sold into slavery. Our suffering didn't end then. The enormous amount of pain, death, and torture inflicted upon us throughout the generations, from the Romans, the Christians, the Muslims, the Germans, the Ukrainians, the Russians, and others, is beyond belief and beyond description. The amount of tears we shed over the generations could fill the oceans. But that's not the point of Tisha B'Av. Our tears on this day are tears of meaning. They are tears that bring out how precious our relationship with God is, and how precious is our relationship with each other. When the house of God stood in all its glory on the Temple Mount, all the Jewish people would flock there regularly in unison to celebrate our special relationship with God and with each other. We cry not to remember the pain of destruction and suffering, but to express how meaningful it was and how meaningful it will be when we will have the Beis Hamikdash back again in the very near future. And we cry because we know that this third and final time, it will be forever. And it will be on a level incomparably deeper and more profound than we've ever experienced in the past. And this is precisely why almost everybody always hated us and wanted to destroy us, and so many still do. What exactly did we do to the Romans, to the Christians or the Muslims, the Germans, the Ukrainians, the Russians to deserve such hatred? We contributed to mankind 100 times more than our share. So why all this bloodthirsty, sadistic hatred? I'll tell you why. It is precisely because we had something so precious, for which we have been crying for 2,000 years. We had something so unique and special that we prayed dozens of times each and every day for the last 2,000 years to get it back. and they all know that we will get it back. They could have had it too, but they were not willing to pay the price. Esav and Yishmael, the guardian angels of the Christians and the Muslims, were not interested in putting in the effort to live righteous and virtuous lives. They were not willing to put up with all the hatred, the pain, and the suffering which being chosen would elicit from those who were not. They were rejected, and their younger brothers, Isaac and Jacob, were chosen, and ever since then, they are seething with hatred. It's like two brothers who had an equal chance to succeed in life. We'll name one Jack and the other Joe. Joe was more interested in having fun than working hard, so nothing became of him. Jack worked extremely hard and became very successful. Not only that, but before their father died, he gave over his successful business to Jack, who would work hard to keep it going and growing. Dad knew that Joe would just run it into the ground. Jack never did anything bad to Joe. In fact, many times he tried to help him get on his feet. Nonetheless, Joe hates Jack with a passion, because Jack constantly reminds him what he could have been had he put in the effort. Joe is so deeply jealous that he could even come to kill his own brother, like Cain killed Abel, because he couldn't bear the shame of God rejecting his inferior sacrifice while accepting that of his brother. There are still many Christians and Muslims who don't want us to have our temple rebuilt on the Temple Mount. They'll do anything to hold us back from being reunited with God in such a tangible way. And that is why the Christian countries of America and Europe, as well as the Russians, are uniting with the hostile Muslims, the Persians, and the Arabs to keep the Temple Mount out of Jewish hands. The Temple Mount means nothing to the Muslims or the Christians. When the Christians had it, they turned it into a garbage dump. When the Muslims had it, and they still do, they go up there by the tens of thousands to antagonize God and his chosen people by turning their backs to the presence of the Holy Shekhinah who dwells on the west side of the mount. They turn their rear ends to the place where the Holy of Holies once stood, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the chamber which housed the Holy Ark where the original tablets that God gave to Moses on Sinai were kept. And they bow down to the opposite direction, to the east, toward the empty, cubed black building in Mecca that for centuries prior to the birth of Islam was a temple for pagan worship. Christians and Muslims feel nothing towards that place, but the fact that it does mean so much to us eats them up and fills them with irrational and uncontrollable jealousy and hatred. And in case you are wondering, that is why President Joe Biden, the most powerful man in the world, who couldn't care less about all the suffering going on in the world, couldn't care less about all the people dying each day in this senseless war between Russia and Ukraine. He couldn't care less about the cruelties being perpetrated on a daily basis from the Iranian Meshugoyim, who he is empowering and encouraging to develop nuclear weapons. And he couldn't care less about all the Jews being murdered almost every week by the bloodthirsty thugs of Mahmoud Abbas. To the contrary, he is showering this bloodthirsty Nazi with hundreds of millions of American taxpayer dollars so he could continue to finance his reign of terror. But what this corrupt Catholic lowlife is deeply troubled about is the fact that an Israeli minister named Ben Gvir takes a 5-minute walk on the Temple Mount, while incidentally being very careful not to pray with his lips so as not to offend the peace-loving Muslims. There's nothing extreme about a Jew who feels a connection to the Temple Mount. He has a healthy, normal Jewish soul. But the dark soul of Joe Biden, like the dark souls of all the bad Christians throughout the generations, is consumed with such an irrational jealousy that a simple stroll on the Temple Mount by a normal Jew gives him no rest. Thank God today we are living in a different world than that of our ancestors, because today there are millions upon millions of Christians and many Muslims as well who realize that the Jews are not the problem. They realize there is no rational basis for jealousy or hatred because there is room for them too in God's plan. They can serve God together with us instead of taking up all that headspace and heart space with jealousy and animosity. So on this day of the 9th of Av, we shed a lot of tears. tears of meaning for the relationship we once had and for the relationship we will have speedily in our days. And we pray that all the nations of the world will join us to serve God in unison, under the guidance and inspiration of the true Jewish Messiah, who will be a deeply observant Torah scholar, a direct descendant through his human father, all the way back to King David, and further up to Yehuda, the son of Jacob. He'll lead the world from the Temple Mount to help each and every human being to realize the enormous potential each of us has to make this world a beautiful garden, where God and mankind will dwell together forever. Have a meaningful Tisha B'Av.